At my funeral, my younger sister wore my wedding ring. She stood beside my coffin in an expensive white coat, one hand resting dramatically over her heart as she told everyone that I had always been a deeply troubled woman. According to her, I had destroyed our family's orchard, stolen money from my own mother, and driven away the husband who had once tried to love me. Every word that came out of her mouth was a lie, but dead women cannot interrupt their own funerals. Stood beside my coffin as an invisible spirit, watching our relatives, neighbors, and former employees lower their heads in sympathy. Some of them whispered that they had always known there was something wrong with me. My sister Celeste dabbed at the corners of her perfectly dry eyes. My mother sat in the front row. She did not cry for me either. After the service ended, everyone slowly left the cemetery. Everyone except one man, my husband, Mason. The moment I saw him, I barely recognized him. He looked 20 years older than the last time I had seen him. His dark hair had turned gray, his shoulders were bent, and the left sleeve of his coat hung empty. He had lost his arm in the accident that killed our son. For years, I had believed Mason abandoned me. I had refused his letters and ignored every message he sent. I had convinced myself that my mother and sister were right, that Mason was jealous, controlling, and secretly wanted to see me fail. Only after my death did I learn the truth. Had never abandoned me. He had spent 23 years trying to prove that Celeste framed me for the fire that destroyed our family's cold storage barn. He had spent decades searching for the evidence that could clear my name. Mason slowly knelt beside my grave and pressed his fingers into the frozen soil. I found the ledger. Nora, he whispered. His voice broke. I was only 2 days too late. The ledger. Grandmother Ruth's blue ledger. The same ledger Celeste had spent years convincing me never existed. Mason placed an old photograph against my headstone. It showed the two of us when we were young. Mason was laughing. I was pretending not to smile, and our children stood between us with apple blossoms tangled in their hair. I should have protected you sooner, Mason said. I should have taken you and the children away from them. He blamed himself, but he was not the one who had failed. I had failed him. I had believed my mother whenever she called him useless. I had believed Celeste whenever she whispered that Mason was jealous of my family's success. I had signed every document they placed in front of me, even when Mason begged me to read the fine print. And when everything collapsed, I blamed the only person who had tried to warn me. Mason lowered his forehead against my headstone. If I could have one more day with you, I would spend every second telling you the truth. The winter wind passed through my transparent body. For the first time in 30 years, I reached toward him. My hand went straight through his face. Mason, I whispered, even though he could not hear me. Give me one more chance. I'll believe you this time. A church bell rang somewhere in the distance, once, twice. Then the cemetery vanished. Someone was shaking my shoulder. Nora. Nora. Wake up! I opened my eyes and found Mason leaning over me. He was not old. His hair was dark. His face was young. His shoulders were strong and both of his arms were still there. I grabbed them without thinking. Mason, I'm here. His expression was filled with concern. You fainted while getting dressed. Should I call the doctor? I stared at him, unable to speak. From outside the cottage came the sound of music. Trucks and people unfolding tables. Someone shouted that the signing ceremony would begin in 20 minutes. My blood turned cold. On the kitchen chair was the blue dress I had worn on the day Celeste took control of Vale Orchard. beside the dress, was the contract that had destroyed my first life. I had not dreamed about the past. I had returned to it, and in 20 minutes, my entire family expected me to sign everything away again. This time, I would not give them my signature, would give them a reason to fear my name. Vale Orchard had belonged to my grandmother before it belonged to anyone else. 300 acres of apple trees covered the hills outside Bellwether, Vermont. There was an old stone farmhouse, a cider house, 2 residential cottages, and a large cold storage barn used during harvest season. My grandmother, Ruth, had built most of the business with her own hands. When I was a child, everyone called me Grandmother's Shadow. She taught me how to graft young trees, calculate harvest yields, and tell whether an apple was ready by twisting it once at the stem. My younger sister, Celeste, had never enjoyed the work. She enjoyed taking photographs beneath the blossoms and posting inspirational captions about carrying on the family legacy. But the moment there were crates to move or accounts to organize, she disappeared. Yet on the morning I returned to the past, a banner hung over the cider house entrance. It read, "Celeste Vale presents Sunvale, a new era for our family orchard." My name was nowhere on it, neither was Mason's. Our 9-year-old daughter, Lily, ran toward us as soon as we stepped outside. "Mom, Aunt Celeste says we're all going to be rich." Our 7-year-old son, Ben, followed her with frosting around his mouth. "Grandma says we can move into the big house when Dad stops being stubborn." Mason's expression tightened. In my previous life, I had criticized him whenever he looked at my family that way. I thought his silence meant resentment. Now I understood. He was worried. But he did not know how to warn me without pushing me farther away. I crouched in front of our children. "Both of you stay close to your father today. You don't go anywhere unless Dad or I give you permission." Lily tilted her head. "Even if Grandma asks?" "Even Grandma." Mason looked at me in surprise. I stood and took his hand. He stared down at our joined fingers as if I had performed some kind of miracle. By this point in our marriage, I had stopped touching him in public. Celeste had convinced me that Mason's quiet personality embarrassed the family. I now knew she had been trying to isolate me from him. The signing table had been placed in front of the cider house. My mother, Diane, sat in the center. My stepfather, Grant, stood behind her in his best suit. My older brother, Travis, leaned against a barrel with a drink already in his hand. Celeste wore cream-colored trousers and a green silk blouse. She looked polished, confident, and completely in control. When she saw me approaching, she smiled. There she is. Our missing partner. Partner. It was a beautiful word for someone expected to carry all the risk while receiving none of the control. The town attorney, Mr. Finch, tapped the papers in front of him. We were about to begin. My mother frowned at me. "Nora, you kept everyone waiting." I fainted. Celeste immediately touched my arm, pretending to be concerned. "Oh, honey. Is it stress? Mason told me you haven't been sleeping." Mason had told her no such thing. It was one of Celeste's favorite tricks. She would invent a private conversation and then watch as people became suspicious of one another. In my first life, it had worked perfectly. This time I smiled. "That's strange. Mason has been beside me all morning." "When did he tell you that?" Her fingers paused on my sleeve. "Last week, perhaps." I turned toward my husband. "Mason?" He looked directly at Celeste. "I haven't spoken to you alone in months." Several guests turned to look at her. Celeste laughed much louder than necessary. I must be remembering incorrectly. "Today is exciting. We're all overwhelmed." Mr. Finch cleared his throat. "Shall we proceed?" Celeste pushed a pen toward me. The papers simply make the new company structure official. Sunvale will manage the business, but everyone in the family will benefit. I sat down but did not touch the pen. Read the collateral clause aloud. Her smile faded slightly. What? The clause explaining what happens if Sunvale fails. Read it. Grant stepped forward. We already explained everything to you. Then explaining it again should be easy. Mr. Finch adjusted his glasses and looked down at the contract. Nora, this agreement pledges Vale Orchard, the cider house, both residential cottages and the personal assets of the guarantors against a commercial loan of $800,000. The crowd became noticeably quieter. I lifted the next page. And who exactly are the guarantors? Mr. Finch hesitated. You, Mason, and your mother. Not Celeste? Celeste folded her arms. My contribution is the Sunvale brand, the distribution strategy, and the overall vision. So if the company succeeds, you control it. But if it fails, Mason and I lose our home. Mother slapped her palm against the table. That is not what this agreement means. It is exactly what it means. Nora, Celeste said gently, you were the one who asked me to modernize the orchard. I asked you to create a website. Someone near the back laughed. Celeste's expression hardened, slid the papers back across the table. I'm not signing. Silence fell over the ceremony. In my first life, my signature had been the final one needed to secure the loan. Celeste had opened champagne. 11 months later, Sunvale defaulted. The bank took our cottage. 2 weeks after that, the cold storage barn burned down, and Celeste blamed me for starting the fire. This time, the pen remained untouched. Mother stood up. You are humiliating your sister in front of the entire town. No. I am refusing to guarantee her debt. After everything this family has done for you, Mason stepped beside me. What exactly has this family done for her? Mother stared at him. No one asked you. I'm her husband. Someone should ask me before putting our house against a loan. Grant pointed toward the road. This is family. Business. Mason did not move. Nora is my family. Those words affected me more deeply than any declaration of love. He had said similar things in my first life, but I had treated them as proof that he was trying to turn me against my relatives. Now they sounded like protection. Celeste's eyes flashed, although her voice remained calm. Nora, think carefully. If you refuse to sign, the investors may walk away. Everyone will know you were the one who destroyed the deal. I stood. Then, everyone should also know that you designed a deal where you receive the reward while the rest of us carry the risk. I took Mason's hand again. Come on. The children are hungry. Behind me, Mother shouted my name. For the first time in my life, I did not turn around. Her anger suddenly sounded much smaller than my own voice. Unfortunately, refusing the contract did not end the matter. Before lunch, Mother, Celeste and Travis arrived at our cottage. They entered without knocking. Mason was making grilled cheese sandwiches for the children while I sat at the kitchen table, writing down everything I remembered. About my previous life, the loan, the missing ledger, the fire, the insurance investigator Celeste had bribed, the date our son died. My hand froze when I reached Ben's name. That future would never happen. Again. Mother looked around the cottage. Since you delayed the financing, we need to reduce expenses somewhere. Mason placed the spatula on the counter. What does that have to do with our home? Celeste opened the clipboard she was holding. The investors were supposed to stay at the local inn during next month's harvest festival. We can save money if they stay here instead. Lily appeared in the hallway. In our bedrooms? Celeste smiled at her. Only temporarily. Your family can move into the apartment above the equipment garage. The garage apartment had mold inside its walls and no reliable heating system. In my previous life, we had agreed to move there. Lily developed pneumonia that winter. Absolutely not, Mason said. Mother ignored him. The cottage belongs to the orchard. No, I replied. The ground belongs to the orchard. Mason and I paid for the roof. Plumbing and renovations. You lived here almost rent-free. Because grandmother gave me a lifetime occupancy agreement. Celeste's. Clipboard lowered, Mother's eyes narrowed. What agreement? The original document was hidden with grandmother's ledger. I did not have it in my hands yet, but I knew it existed. The agreement grandmother signed before she died. Grant entered behind them. That document was never filed. Then why are all of you suddenly nervous? No one answered. I turned toward Travis. You still own the lake cabin, don't you? His measuring tape stopped in the middle of the window. What does my cabin have to do with this? It has 6 bedrooms. The investors would be much more comfortable there. Travis looked at Celeste. That place needs repairs. You told me it was ready, Celeste said. I said it could be ready. Perfect, I replied. Travis can demonstrate his commitment to the family. Vision. Mother immediately nodded. That might be better. Travis dropped his measuring tape. The back deck isn't stable. Grant frowned. You told me you repaired it with the money I gave. I bought the materials. Where are they? Travis looked toward Celeste, but she avoided his eyes. Within seconds, the 3 of them were arguing over $30,000 Travis had supposedly spent renovating the cabin. In my previous life, one of Celeste's investors had fallen through the rotten deck. The lawsuit had been paid using orchard money, and Mason had been blamed for not inspecting the cabin. This time, I watched silently as Travis was forced to admit where the money had really gone. He had purchased a truck, a fishing boat, and expensive gifts for a woman named Sabrina. Mother's face became redder with each confession. Celeste turned toward me. You did this deliberately. I only suggested a larger house. You knew they would fight. Celeste, I cannot control the consequences of other people's bookkeeping. Mason covered his smile with one hand. Mother stormed out while ordering Travis to show Grant every bank statement and receipt he possessed. Celeste remained at the doorway. For 1 second, the sweetness disappeared from her face. You think refusing one signature changes anything? No, I replied. It changes the first thing. Her eyes moved toward the notebook in front of me. What are you writing? A list. Of what? Things I refuse to lose twice. She did not understand my answer. Not yet. After everyone left, Mason locked the door and stared at me. Who are you? My heart skipped. What do you mean? You woke up this morning and began acting like you've been preparing for this exact day for years. I wanted to tell him everything. I wanted to tell him that I had watched him kneel at my grave. That I knew about the accident that would take his arm and our son. That I knew how many decades he would spend trying to clear my name. But how could I ask him to believe something I still barely understood? I had a dream, I said, a bad one. The worst dream imaginable. He pulled out the chair beside me. Tell me. I looked toward the hallway where our children were laughing. In that dream, I trusted the wrong people. His jaw tightened. And me, I didn't trust you enough. For several seconds, he did not speak. Then he placed his hand over mine. You can start now. I lowered my head before he could see my tears. I intend to. That night, After everyone went to sleep, I quietly put on my boots and grabbed a flashlight. But when I stepped onto the porch, Mason was already waiting for me. "You're not going alone. I didn't tell you I was going anywhere. You put on boots," took a flashlight and checked the bedroom window 3 times. He held up his coat. "You're not very subtle." We crossed the orchard beneath a moonless sky. The old stone farmhouse stood at the top of the hill. Every window was dark. Grandmother's unused bedroom was on the ground floor. Mother kept it locked, claiming it was too painful for her to enter. In reality, she had spent years searching it. The window latch had been broken since I was a child. Mason lifted it quietly, and we climbed inside. The room still smelled faintly of lavender and cedar. Grandmother's heavy winter coat hung in the back of the wardrobe. In my first life, I had found a brass key sewn inside its lining after the cold storage fire. By then, the coat was burned, and the room the key opened had already been emptied. This time, when I opened the lining, the key fell directly into my palm. Mason whispered, "What does it open?" "The root cellar beneath the greenhouse. You've known about this all along?" I remembered tonight. It was not entirely a lie. The greenhouse had been abandoned after Grandmother died. Ivy covered its glass walls, and rust sealed the outer doors. Inside, beneath an old workbench, we found a metal ring set into the floor. The brass key opened the padlock. Cold air rose from beneath us. Mason climbed down first. The cellar was filled with old jars, seed envelopes, and account boxes. Against the far wall stood a blue steel cabinet. The key opened that. Too, inside was Grandmother's ledger, held the book against my chest. Mason watched me as though he understood that it was more than an old account book. We sat on the cellar floor and began reading. The first pages contained ordinary harvest information, but halfway through the ledger, Mason suddenly stopped breathing. His father's name was written across the page. Thomas Reed had invested $140,000 in Vale Orchard in exchange for a 35% ownership interest. The investment had never been repaid. The ownership legally passed to Thomas's heir, Mason. He read the entry again and again. My father owned part of this place. He financed the cold storage expansion. My mother always told me he lost everything before he died. He didn't lose it. My family took it from him. A folded letter rested between the pages. Mason opened it. His father had written to Grandmother 3 months before his death. Thomas had discovered that Grant was removing money from the orchard's accounts. He planned to demand a complete audit, but Thomas died in a supposed hunting accident before that meeting occurred. Mason's face changed as he read. I placed a hand on his arm. "This proves ownership, but it doesn't prove what happened to your father. It proves Grant lied to me for 20 years. Behind the letter were Grandmother's original cider recipes, maps showing the orchard's property, boundaries, and my notarized lifetime occupancy. Agreement for the cottage." Mason gave a humorless laugh. "They knew, yes. All those times your mother called me a freeloader. They were using my inheritance while forcing me to work for free." He closed the ledger. "We take this to a lawyer tomorrow." "Not yet." Mason stared at me. "If Grant finds out we have the ledger, he will destroy every other record before we discover how much he has stolen." "What are you planning?" "First, we let them believe the ledger is still missing. And then?" I looked at his father's name. "Then we allow them to explain their crimes while they still believe we have no proof." Celeste had always claimed she was lucky. Mother called her a blessing to the family in my first life. Every prediction Celeste made appeared to come true. She selected profitable apple varieties before the market changed. She purchased land before the state announced new roads. She signed customers days before their old suppliers collapsed. I thought she possessed some extraordinary gift. After my death, I learned the truth. Celeste read private letters. She stole grandmother's notes. She bribed clerks for confidential information. Whenever someone else discovered an opportunity, Celeste moved first and claimed it as her own. Her luck depended entirely on everyone around her being too trusting to ask questions. 3 days after the failed signing ceremony, Celeste ordered the workers to harvest apples from the north field. Maya Ortiz, our packing supervisor, examined the fruit and warned her that it needed another week to ripen. Celeste insisted that her buyer wanted a sharper flavor. In my previous life, I supported Celeste's decision. The apples produced a sour batch, and she blamed Maya for the failure. Mother fired Maya. Without employment, Maya lost her apartment, and her daughter dropped out of school. This time, I cut open an apple and held up the pale seeds. They're immature. Celeste claimed the sugar test was fine. When I asked her to show us the results, she refused, so I proposed that she harvest only the western half of the field while leaving the eastern half to reap, and Celeste agreed because refusing in front of the workers would make her appear uncertain. 3 days later, her buyer rejected the entire shipment. The fruit was acidic. Several boxes had been damaged during the rushed packing process, and the customer threatened to cancel its relationship with Sunvale.Celeste. Immediately called an emergency meeting and blamed Maya. But before Mother could fire her, I placed Celeste's signed harvest order on the table. The document clearly stated the field, date, and packing speed. Celeste accused Maya of not warning her strongly. Enough. Maya said she had warned her 3 separate times. Then I placed a recorder on the table and played their conversation. Maya could be heard telling Celeste the apples were not ready. Celeste responded by threatening to fire her unless she harvested them immediately. The room became silent. Celeste stared at the recorder. You recorded a private conversation? Maya lifted her chin. Nora instructed every supervisor to document orders involving quality control. Disputes. Mother turned toward me. You are encouraging employees to spy on family? No, I'm protecting employees from being used as scapegoats. A week later, the apples from the eastern section were perfectly ripe. Maya and I pressed them using grandmother's original recipe. The cider was crisp, fragrant, and clean. We sold every bottle at the Bellwether Farmers Market. When Celeste arrived, she asked how much we had earned. I handed Maya an envelope containing half the profit. She stared at the amount. This is more than my monthly salary. You did half the work, Celeste. Tried to take our sales record, but I folded it away. She claimed the batch belonged to Sunvale because we had used family apples. That was when I showed her my production lease. Grandmother had legally granted me the right to use 12 acres of the orchard. Independently, Celeste's face became completely still. She had never known that agreement existed. Neither had Mother. I leaned closer and smiled. Maybe your luck doesn't tell you everything. The following weekend, Celeste launched her premium Sunvale cider at a regional food festival. She had expensive glass bottles, gold labels, and a professional photographer. Maya and I had one folding table, plain bottles and handwritten signs. Celeste laughed when she saw us. Beside the kettle corn stand, Maya told her the kettle corn smelled better than her perfume. I nearly choked. Trying not to laugh, at 10 o'clock, representatives from the Hawthorne Hotel arrived. In my first life, Their contract had made Celeste famous. She had stolen grandmother's recipe from my kitchen and presented it as her own. This time, Celeste served them cider produced from the sour apples. She had added sweeteners to hide the acidity. Mr. Hawthorne took one sip and asked whether it contained artificial flavoring. Celeste claimed it used only natural enhancements, even though the label listed only apple juice. While she struggled to explain, another customer tasted our cider and called Mr. Hawthorne over. He took one sip, then another. Who created this? My grandmother developed the recipe. Maya manages production. He asked if we could supply 800 cases before December. Celeste laughed and said our operation was only a hobby. I handed him the production plan, Mason, and I had prepared. We can deliver 900 cases without sacrificing quality. He offered us an initial contract for 600, Celeste. Step between us. Vale Orchard owns the fruit. Any contract has to go through Sunvale. I gave Mr. Hawthorne copies of my lease and production agreement. My section is legally independent. Mr. Hawthorne nodded and signed with us. Celeste grabbed my wrist. You planned this? Mason appeared beside me so quickly that she immediately let go. Don't touch my wife. People around us turned to watch. Celeste lowered her voice and told Mason that I was using him. He looked at the signed contract in my hand and our empty display table. She's doing a terrible job of using me. I'm enjoying myself. By the end of the day, photographs from the festival had spread across social media. The most popular image showed our small table surrounded by customers while Celeste's expensive gold display stood empty in the background. That evening, Mother insisted that our earnings belonged to the family. I explained that I would pay for the fruit, labor, bottles, equipment, and taxes. Mother asked what would happen to the remaining profit. It belongs to the people who created it. Mother said that in our family, everything was shared. Mason placed an old payroll book on the table. Good. Then, let's share all the wages you never paid me. Grants. Chair scraped across the floor. He demanded. To know what Mason meant, Mason reminded them that he had spent 15 years repairing equipment, rebuilding the cider press, and working every harvest weekend without pay. They always claimed he was helping the family. But when Mason needed anything, they called him a burden. Celeste looked from him to me. You two have been planning this together. I smiled. That is usually what married people do. 2 nights later, someone searched our cottage. Nothing obvious had been stolen, but the flour jar faced the wrong direction. The back window latch was loose, and grandmother's recipe notebook had shifted. Celeste was searching for the blue ledger. She did not know we had found it, but she suspected I possessed documents she had never seen. So I gave her something to find. I purchased a blue notebook similar to grandmother's ledger. Inside it, I wrote a completely false pear cider recipe. I also added fake information about a wholesale buyer and a storage shed where I supposedly kept valuable contracts. Mason installed hidden cameras inside the cottage. The next morning, I made sure Mother overheard me telling Maya that the important notebook was locked in my bedroom trunk. At 12:47 that afternoon, Celeste climbed through our back window. 6 minutes later, she left with the notebook beneath her coat. By 4 o'clock, she had ordered almost every available pear in 3 counties. By Friday, she had spent nearly $20,000. There was only one problem. The recipe I wrote produced vinegar. Strong, cloudy, extremely expensive vinegar. Grant stormed into our cottage holding one of the jars. What did you do? I looked up from dinner. To what? This recipe. Celeste entered behind him. The pear blend. I have never produced a pear blend. She threw the blue notebook onto our table. This one. Mason slowly lowered his fork. Where did you get that? Celeste froze. Mother entered and quickly claimed the notebook had been found in the packing office. I opened it. My handwriting, my private notes. A notebook that was locked inside my bedroom. Celeste claimed I must have left it at work. I said the security footage would answer that question. Her face went blank. Mason connected his phone to the television. The video clearly showed Celeste climbing through our cottage window. Lily covered Ben's eyes. Is Aunt Celeste a burglar? Ben shook his head. Burglars wear masks. Maya, who had joined us for dinner, coughed to hide her laughter. Mother ordered Mason to turn off the television. I asked why. We're learning about family values. Celeste tried to grab Mason's phone, but he held it out of her reach. He told her that she had trespassed and stolen from our home. Celeste insisted she had only been protecting the orchard because she knew I was hiding information. I looked at her calmly. You assumed that anything I discovered automatically belonged to you. Grant asked how much the pears had cost. Celeste admitted the amount. Mother turned toward me. You deliberately wrote false information. In my private notebook. You wanted her to find it. I wanted to know whether she would enter my home and steal it. Celeste began crying. You're turning everyone against me. No. I stopped protecting them from seeing who you really are. Mother stepped forward and raised her hand to hit me. Mason caught her wrist before she reached my face. The room became completely silent. He released her slowly. You will never hit my wife. Mother stared at him as though a household tool had suddenly spoken back. I raised her. And somehow you still don't know her. Mason opened the door and told everyone to leave. Mother looked at me, waiting for me to correct him as I always had. Instead, I pointed toward the porch. You heard my husband. A few days later, Walter Finch asked to meet me privately. Walter had managed the orchard's accounts for 30 years, but Grant had recently stopped allowing him into financial meetings. We met at a diner outside Bellwether. Walter spent several minutes rotating his coffee cup without drinking. Finally, he said, Your grandmother never trusted Grant. I know. His hand stopped. How much do you know? I told him about Thomas Reed's investment and Mason's inherited ownership. Walter's face lost its color. You found the ledger. I did not answer. He lowered his voice. Do not let Grant know. Walter explained that Mason's father had discovered Grant stealing money from Vale Orchard shortly before his death. Thomas intended to expose him. The official report claimed Thomas's rifle accidentally discharged while he crossed a fence during a hunting trip. But Grant had been with him that morning. I asked Walter why he never told the police. He said he told my mother. She responded that accusing her husband would destroy the family. So everyone remained silent. Walter removed a folder from his briefcase. Grant had taken more than $600,000 from the orchard over 20 years. Some withdrawals were disguised as equipment purchases. Others were transferred through businesses controlled by Travis. The Sunvale loan was designed to replace the missing money before an audit exposed it. That was why they desperately needed my signature. They were not simply financing Celeste's business. They were covering Grant's theft. Walter gave me copies of the records. When I asked why he had finally decided to help, he said grandmother once told him that cowardice becomes a habit unless someone interrupts it. He was tired of being practiced at silence. Mason waited outside in the truck. After reading the records, he told me something he had hidden for years. 1 week before our wedding, Grant offered him $50,000 to disappear. Grant claimed, "I would eventually realize Mason was not good enough for me." Mason refused the money and never told me because he believed the matter was over. It had never been over. He warned me that if we pursued the investigation, my mother could also face consequences. I thought about the woman who had sat dry-eyed at my funeral. She chose what she wanted to protect. Mason asked what I chose. "You," I said. "You, Lily and Ben. Anyone else has to earn the privilege of being called my family." For the first time, we were truly working together. Not long after that, Mrs. Alvarez asked me to fill an empty position on the Bellwether Harvest Board. The board managed festival permits, vendor disputes, and public grants. Mother called my appointment a conflict of interest. Celeste called it manipulation. Grant called the mayor. None of their complaints worked. During my first meeting, a widow named Helen Brooks was about to lose her bakery because of a predatory distribution contract. Her late husband had handled the paperwork, and she did not fully understand what she had signed. The contract gave the distributor control over her prices, required impossible minimum deliveries, and allowed the company to seize her equipment after a single missed payment. The distributor had not given Helen any money or equipment in return. It had only promised market access. The contract looked remarkably similar to Celeste's Sunvale agreement. The board suspended the company's attempt to seize Helen's bakery and referred the matter to the state consumer office. Helen cried in the hallway and said I had saved her business. I told her that the contract had only worked because it expected no one to read it. By the end of the day, Mrs. Alvarez asked me to review several more cases. For the first time, I understood why Celeste feared me holding any position outside our family. Inside Vale Orchard, Mother controlled the meaning of truth. Outside it, documents mattered, witnesses mattered, patterns mattered. 2 weeks later, the Harvest Board began auditing every business that had received a public festival grant. Sunvale was one of those businesses. Celeste came to our cottage and demanded that I stop the audit. I explained that I had already recused myself from the process. She admitted that the company's records were not ready. When I asked why, she called the problems administrative mistakes. I asked whether those mistakes involved using grant money to repay private debts. Her expression confirmed my suspicion. Celeste stared at me. "You were never this intelligent." I had an educational experience. "What happened to you that morning?" I woke up. The first attempt on my life occurred during Harvest Week. I was driving a loaded utility cart down a steep hill when the brake pedal suddenly went to the floor. At the bottom of the slope, several children were crossing between the pumpkin field and cider house. In my first life, Mason had taught me what to do if hydraulic brakes failed. I shifted into a lower gear, turned across the hill, and steered directly into a stack of empty hay bales. The impact threw me sideways. Mason reached me before the engine stopped. After checking that I was not seriously injured, he looked under the cart. The brake line had been cut. Celeste arrived with Mother and Travis. Travis laughed nervously and claimed those lines failed naturally. Mason pointed out the clean diagonal cut. Mother accused him of neglecting equipment maintenance. I stopped Mason before he could confront them. The children and workers were watching. Celeste knelt beside me and said this was what happened when I tried to control everything. I looked at her right hand. There was a thin red scratch across her palm. The rear latch of the maintenance shed was broken, and anyone climbing through it would have caught their skin on an exposed wire. I told Celeste she was right, and that I needed to be more careful. That night, Mason wanted to contact the sheriff immediately. I wanted to wait until the Harvest Festival because I knew Celeste's next move. He became angry. He told me I was walking toward danger because I believed I could control an ending he could not see. He was right. In my first life, Mason had hidden his investigation to protect me. I had hated him for it. Now I was doing the same thing. So I showed him my notebook. It contained every date I remembered: the loan signing, the cold storage fire, my arrest, Ben's death. Mason's hand froze when he reached our son's name. "What is this?" I finally told him the truth. I told him about my death, his confession beside my grave, and the future accident that would take his arm and Ben's life. When I finished, the kitchen was completely silent. Mason asked how he lost his arm. I explained that Ben called him after Mother took him from school. Mason drove through an ice storm, and a truck crossed the center line. Ben died before the ambulance arrived. Mason covered his mouth. Then he stood near the staircase, listening to our son's footsteps above us. He returned and asked whether Ben was really alive. Yes. He suddenly pulled me against him. "You have been carrying this alone since you woke up? I didn't know how to tell you. You never carry it alone again. I promised." He also made me promise that I would never use myself as bait without telling him. The following morning, we contacted Sheriff Cole. He agreed to investigate quietly. The severed brake line went to a state laboratory, and Mason installed cameras around our cottage, equipment sheds, and barns. We temporarily moved Lily and Ben into the apartment above Maya's sister's store. Mother reacted angrily. She accused me of keeping her grandchildren away from her. I told her our children were not bargaining tools. She asked who had said anything about using them as leverage. No one had. But her reaction told me she had considered it. 2 days later, the Harvest Board's audit found that Sunvale had paid public grant money to a company owned by Travis. Grant called an emergency family meeting. Walter Finch attended. Sheriff Cole also came, although Grant believed he was only serving as a neutral witness. Grant placed an agreement on the table. He proposed that Mason and I leave Vale Orchard. In exchange, the family would forgive the imaginary housing debt they claimed we owed. Walter opened his briefcase. "Before anyone discusses a division, we must establish who actually owns the property." Grant ordered Walter to leave. Instead, Walter placed a copy of Grandmother's ledger on the table. Mason watched Grant's reaction rather than looking at the book. Grant stepped back. Mother sat down. Celeste whispered, "Where did you find that?" No one had said it had been found. Sheriff Cole noticed. Walter read Thomas Reed's investment record aloud. He read my lifetime occupancy agreement and the document granting me production rights over 12 acres. He then summarized the missing money Grant had removed from Orchard accounts. Travis claimed the ledger was fake. Walter pointed out that every important signature had been notarized. Mother turned toward me. "You would destroy your own family over money?" "No. Grant stole from the orchard. Celeste concealed it. Travis received the money, and you protected them. I am simply refusing to be destroyed with you." Celeste accused me of always hating her. I reminded her that I had spent most of my life rescuing her. She said I was jealous of her success. I asked what part of her success truly belonged to her. She needed someone else's recipe, someone else's signature, someone else's labor, and someone else to blame. Celeste stood so suddenly that her chair fell backward. You think Mason will stay with you after he receives his ownership share? Men change when money appears. Mason looked at her. I had Nora when I had nothing. Celeste stared at him. You could have had more. The room fell silent. She had not directly confessed to wanting him, but she had revealed enough. Mother looked at her daughter with confusion. I explained that Mason owned 35% of the orchard. My inherited rights and lease accounted for another 20%. Grant had never possessed the authority to pledge the entire property. He asked what I wanted. An independent audit. Complete separation of Sunvale from orchard accounts. Repayment of Thomas Reed's investment. Legal recognition of my cottage and production rights. And no unsupervised contact between any of you and my children. Mother shouted that I could not keep her away from her grandchildren. I reminded her that children were not tools she could use to force me into obedience. Grant asked what would happen if they refused. That was when Sheriff Cole spoke. He told them the financial crimes referral would proceed without their cooperation. Grant finally realized the meeting had never been private. Celeste looked at me. You set us up. No. I invited witnesses. Mother ignored the restriction within 48 hours. Maya was walking Lily and Ben home from school when Mother pulled over beside them. She told the children I had been taken to the hospital. Lily almost entered the car. Ben remembered my warning. Mom said we don't go anywhere without her or Dad. Mother reached for his backpack. Maya stepped between them and ordered her to leave. When Mason learned what happened, he drove directly to the farmhouse. I followed because I feared what he might do. He did not shout. That frightened Mother more. He placed a school trespass notice on the kitchen table. You will never approach my children again. Mother looked at me. See what you have turned him into? You still believe his boundaries belong to me. He was never like this before. He was. You simply depended on him remaining silent. Grant entered the room and said everything Mason possessed had come from them. Mason placed his father's letter on the table. No. Much of what you own came from my father. For 1 second, Grant looked toward the old hunting rifle mounted above the fireplace. Mason noticed. So did I. Sheriff Cole later removed the rifle under a search warrant. Although investigators could not fully reconstruct a 20-year-old accident, they discovered that the weapon had been illegally altered. Grant's former hunting partner also changed his statement. He remembered hearing 2 gunshots. Grant had reported only 1. The past had finally begun to speak. Then the date of the fire arrived. In my previous life, the fire happened during the Harvest Moon Festival. Celeste asked me to inspect the cold storage barn after midnight. When I entered, smoke was already pouring from the electrical room. I escaped, but the security camera showed only my arrival. Celeste had deleted the footage of herself planting the accelerant. Investigators found my fingerprints on a fuel container she had asked me to move earlier that week. My access code opened the building. My signature was on the loan. My own family testified against me. This time, every camera worked. Sheriff Cole placed plainclothes officers among the festival guests. Mason replaced the fuel containers with harmless water-filled decoys marked using invisible dye. Walter publicly announced that the independent audit would begin the following morning. We wanted Grant and Celeste to believe that the fire was their final opportunity to destroy the evidence. At 10:30, music filled the orchard. At 11, Celeste disappeared from the main field. Travis left 5 minutes later. Grant remained beside Mother, smiling much more than usual. Mason stood near the cider tent and reminded me that I was not allowed to follow them. I showed him the tracking application on my phone. Maya had hidden small trackers inside Celeste's bag and Travis's jacket. Both signals were moving toward the cold storage barn. Sheriff Cole's officers followed them. At 11:17, the building's alarm sounded. Smoke appeared beneath the loading doors. Grant shouted that the barn was on fire. But instead of running toward the fire, he ran toward the orchard office. Mason and I followed at a safe distance. Grant emerged carrying 2 boxes of financial records. Sheriff Cole stepped from behind a truck, put them down. Across the yard, officers pulled Travis out of the barn. His hands were covered in blue dye. Celeste came out behind him, coughing. That idiot started it too soon. Every nearby guest heard her. Travis turned on her. You told me the alarm was disabled. You were supposed to wait until Nora went inside. Silence spread through the crowd. Celeste realized what she had said. She turned toward me. I stood beneath the festival lights beside Mason, alive, safe, surrounded by witnesses. Firefighters entered the building. The smoke was coming from a controlled training device that Sheriff Cole had authorized after his officers intercepted the real accelerant. There was no true fire, no destroyed evidence, no injured workers, no children waiting for their mother to return home. Celeste stepped backward and accused Sheriff Cole of entrapment. He told her that no one had forced her to bring an accelerant into the building. She pointed at Travis and claimed everything was his idea. Travis shouted that Celeste planned the entire operation. Grant dropped one of the file boxes and tried to run. Mason blocked his path. Grant swung first. Mason stepped aside, caught his arm, and forced him to the ground. For one terrible moment, Mason stood over the man who might have murdered his father. I saw 20 years of rage pass over his face. Then he stepped away. Take him. Grant looked up and called Mason weak, just like Thomas. Mason's hands tightened. I touched his shoulder. He looked at me, then toward Lily and Ben, who were safely standing beside Maya. No, he said. I'm nothing like you. Sheriff Cole placed Grant in handcuffs. Mother pushed through the crowd. What have you done? Celeste immediately began crying. Mom, Nora set us up. Mother looked at the blue dye on Celeste's hands, Travis in handcuffs and Grant lying on the ground. Then she looked at me. For once, I did not argue. There was no lie left that required my explanation. Celeste was eventually released while awaiting trial. Grant remained in custody on charges involving fraud, evidence tampering, and the reopened investigation into Thomas Reed's death. Travis accepted a plea deal and gave the authorities bank records, emails, and recorded conversations. Every trail led back to Celeste. But she still possessed one weapon, her story. She contacted a reporter and claimed I had manipulated the investigation to steal Vale Orchard. She described Mason as violent. She said Maya and Walter were paid witnesses. She insisted the Harvest Board audit was part of my personal revenge campaign. For several days, people argued online. Then Celeste announced that she would give a public interview outside the courthouse. Dozens of people attended. So did I. Mason wanted me to remain at home, but I refused. I spent 2 lives allowing her to describe me. I'm finished. Celeste stood before the cameras in a pale blue outfit. She looked fragile, betrayed, and carefully exhausted. My sister has always resented me, she began. I tried to build something for our family, but Nora could not tolerate watching me succeed. The reporter asked about the fire plan. Celeste claimed she had gone to the barn to stop Travis. She said the recordings and footage had been altered. When asked about the missing public money, she blamed accounting mistakes. When asked why she entered our cottage, she claimed she was checking on me because I had been behaving irrationally. Then she looked directly at the camera. I believe my sister needs professional help. In my previous life, similar words had followed me everywhere. Unstable, jealous, dangerous. I stepped toward the reporters. Celeste looked surprised, then immediately arranged her face into an expression of concern. I did not want a public confrontation. You announced one. I only wanted the truth to be heard. So do I. I placed a small speaker on the courthouse wall. The first recording played. It was Celeste saying that once she stole my formula, Sunvale would no longer need me. The second recording came from near the maintenance shed. Celeste's voice instructed Travis to damage the brake line enough that it would fail while I drove downhill. Her voice clearly stated that everyone would blame poor maintenance. Celeste's face collapsed. The third recording came from the barn. Wait until Nora enters. Then start the fire. The crowd fell completely silent. Celeste lunged toward the speaker, but Sheriff Cole stepped between us. She turned toward me. You recorded me without permission. The barn and maintenance shed were business properties under an active criminal investigation. You wanted me to fail. I wanted you to stop. You took everything away from me. What exactly did I take? My company. My family. Mason. The final name escaped before she could stop herself. Mason stood several feet behind me. Celeste looked at him. You were never happy with her. She ignored you and mocked you. I understood you. Mason's voice remained calm. You understood that I was useful. That isn't true. You asked me to repair your car for free, build your office for free, and fix your mistakes. Whenever I refused, you told Nora I was jealous. Celeste began crying. I was trying to protect her. No, you were trying to isolate her. She turned toward me and claimed Mason had shared private details about our marriage. Mason shook his head. She used that exact trick on the day you refused the loan. She is still doing it. The crowd began whispering. Her performance was breaking apart. Celeste pointed at me. You think you're better than me because grandmother preferred you. No. She gave you the recipes, the land, and the cottage. She gave me responsibility. She never saw me. She saw you clearly. That is what you hated. Celeste slapped me. The sound echoed across the courthouse steps. Mason moved toward us. I raised one hand to stop him. Celeste stood there breathing heavily. I could have hit her back. Part of me desperately wanted to. Instead, I looked directly at the cameras. That is who she becomes when the story stops obeying her. Sheriff Cole arrested Celeste for violating the conditions of her release. As officers led her away, she turned toward Mother. Tell them Nora has always hated me. Mother stood near the curb. Everyone waited for her answer. In my first life, she had chosen Celeste every single time. This time, she lowered her eyes. I cannot help you anymore. Celeste stopped struggling. The betrayal on her face looked almost childlike. Then the officers placed her inside the vehicle. For the first time, she had no one left to carry the consequences for her. Mother came to our cottage during the winter. The orchard was covered in fresh snow. Grant had been charged with fraud, theft, and obstruction. Prosecutors were still investigating the circumstances surrounding Thomas's death. Celeste faced conspiracy, attempted arson, sabotage, and misuse of public funds. Travis had moved away after agreeing to testify. Mother stood on our porch holding a cardboard box. Mason opened the door but did not invite her inside. She said she wanted to speak to me. Inside the box were photographs, letters, and a silver hairpin grandmother used to wear. Mother explained that the stone farmhouse would be sold because Grant's assets had been frozen. Then she looked past us toward Lily and Ben, who were decorating cookies inside. I miss them. They're safe. I never would have hurt them. You lied to them to get them into your car. I only wanted you to talk to me. You could have called. You stopped answering. That was an answer. Mother flinched. I made mistakes. I waited. She seemed to believe those 3 words would automatically open our door. They were more than mistakes. I was trying to keep the family together. No. You were keeping everyone beneath the people you favored. She insisted Celeste needed more help than I did. So you gave her my work. She was sensitive. So you gave her my protection. She made terrible choices. So you gave her my life. Mother looked down. I did love you. I believe you loved the version of me who never told you no. That isn't fair. Neither was my childhood. Mason rested one hand lightly against my back. Mother looked at him, then at me. You won. Her words made something inside me become very still. This was never supposed to be a competition. It always felt like one, because Celeste needed someone else to lose. Mother began crying. In my previous life, her tears would have ended the conversation. I would have comforted her before understanding my own pain. This time, I allowed the silence to remain. She asked what I wanted from her. The truth. I want you to testify about the accounts, the ledger, Thomas and the fire plan. If I testify, Grant could spend the rest of his life in prison. He may deserve to. He is my husband. And Mason is mine. Mother looked at him. Mason did not lower his eyes. Eventually, she agreed to testify. I told her that was only a beginning. She asked whether she could see the children. Not today. After you testify, attend counseling and prove you can respect our boundaries. We can discuss supervised visits. You have rules for everything now. Yes, your grandmother would have said family should forgive. Grandmother also kept records. Mason coughed to hide a laugh. Even Mother almost smiled. She handed me the box. At the bottom was an envelope with my name written across. A grandmother had written the letter before she died. Nora. Kindness without boundaries becomes permission. Never confuse endurance with love. I read the words twice. Perhaps grandmother understood far more than any of us realized. Mother left without entering the cottage. I watched her walk. Through the snow, I did not feel victorious. Felt the quiet pain of finally accepting that someone could love me and still be unsafe. Mason. Close the door. You okay? No, he waited. But I will be. The legal battle over Vale Orchard lasted 8 months. Thomas reads. 35% interest was upheld. My production lease and lifetime right to the cottage were also legally confirmed, because Grant had stolen orchard funds. Much of his remaining ownership was taken as restitution. Mother kept a small share. Mason and I became the controlling owners. The morning the judgment arrived, Mason sat at our kitchen table and stared at the papers. "You own the orchard," I told him. "We own it. Your father's investment saved this place. And your grandmother preserved the proof." He traced Thomas's signature. "I spent my whole life believing my father left us with nothing. He left you the truth." Mason looked through the window toward the cold storage barn. "Do you still want to stay here?" The question surprised me. This was your family's land before it was mine. That isn't what I asked. He was giving me a choice. In my previous life, the orchard had always been treated as a sacred obligation. No one ever asked whether it made me happy. I thought about grandmother teaching me beneath the blossoms, thought about Maya laughing beside our market table and our children running between the trees. "I want to keep the parts that are alive," I said, "not the parts that were designed to trap us." So we changed. Everything, the Sunvale name, disappeared. Celeste's gold labels were thrown into recycling. We renamed the business Second Harvest Orchard Maya, became the operations director, and received an ownership share. Walter trained a new accounting department before retiring. Helen opened a bakery inside the cider house. We converted the large stone farmhouse into temporary housing for women rebuilding their lives after financial abuse or unsafe relationships. Mother objected. Then she remembered that she no longer controlled the vote. The cold storage barn became a cooperative production space for local farmers. Mason built a workshop beside it. On the workshop wall, he hung a photograph of Thomas Reed and grandmother Ruth shaking hands in front of the original cider press. Beneath it, he installed a brass plaque. "What is built together must never be stolen in silence." Lily began helping Maya design labels. Ben followed Mason everywhere with a toy toolbox. One afternoon, I found Mason repairing the utility cart whose brake line Celeste had cut. "Why are you keeping that thing? It still works." It almost killed me. The cart didn't cut its own brakes. I leaned against the workbench. That sounds very philosophical. "I'm becoming wise. You're becoming old." He pulled me closer. "In your other life, how old did I become?" The question no longer frightened me quite as much. "Old enough to have gray hair." "Did it look good?" "Annoyingly good. And you?" I never saw myself clearly. He touched my cheek. "Then look now." I glanced toward my reflection in the workshop window. The woman looking back was not the obedient daughter. She was not the jealous sister Celeste had invented. She was not the criminal my family had described. She was me, alive, loved still, learning how much space she was allowed to occupy. All of it. I realized I was allowed all of it. Grant's trial came. First, Mother testified for 2 full days. She admitted that Thomas threatened to audit the orchard shortly before his death. She admitted that Grant returned from the hunting trip with blood on his clothing that did not belong to him. She admitted helping hide financial records. Grant stared at her throughout her testimony. She never looked back at him. The jury convicted him of fraud, embezzlement, and obstruction. There was not enough evidence for a murder conviction, but the suspicious circumstances surrounding Thomas's death were considered during sentencing. Grant received 24 years in prison. At his age, it was effectively a life sentence. Celeste accepted a plea agreement after Travis gave prosecutors the original instructions for the fire. She received 9 years. During her sentencing, she asked to speak. She turned toward me. I know you're happy. I'm not. You should be. You took everything. I thought about my first life, our son's funeral. Mason kneeling beside my grave. Years no judge could return. No sentence can give back. Everything you were willing to destroy. Celeste laughed bitterly. You always wanted everyone to believe you were the good sister. No, I wanted to have a sister. For one moment, her expression cracked. I caught a glimpse of the child she might once have been, then it vanished. You'll get tired of pretending to be perfect. I was never perfect. That isn't what everyone thinks. People are finally seeing both of us as we truly are. That is what you cannot tolerate. A guard touched her arm and led her away. Celeste looked toward Mother. Mother sat in the back row but did not rise. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited for us. I did not speak to them. Mason and I walked toward our truck. Do you feel different? He asked. Yes. Better? Lighter. He opened the passenger door for me. Where would you like to go? Home. This time, I knew exactly where that was. 1 year after the fire that never happened, Second Harvest held its first autumn festival. Lanterns hung between the apple trees. Helen sold cinnamon pastries until the line reached the road. Maya's daughter performed with the school band. Walter sat beneath a blanket, complaining about the new accounting software to anyone willing to listen. Mother attended for 1 hour. Her contact with the children was still supervised. She had kept her promises so far. I did not trust her completely. Trust was no longer something I gave because another person demanded it. It was something they built through their actions. Lily ran toward me, holding a blue ribbon. Our label won. Ben followed her with cider spilled down his shirt. Dad says the stain is part of the uniform. Mason approached behind them. I never said that. You said stains prove you worked, Ben replied. I was talking about my shirt. Ben looked at his own shirt. I worked too. Mason lifted him onto one shoulder. Lily took his free hand. For one terrible second, I remembered the future I had escaped. A snow-covered road, a truck crossing the center line, a call arriving too late. The memory stole my breath. Mason noticed immediately. He placed Ben down and stepped closer. Which life are you in? It was the question he asked whenever the past began pulling me away. I looked at our son, our daughter, the orchard lights. This one. Good. He kissed my forehead. A few minutes later, Mrs. Alvarez tapped the microphone on the small festival stage. Nora, you're supposed to give a speech. I had prepared pages of statistics, jobs restored, debts repaid, small businesses supported. But when I stood in front of the crowd, I saw people rather than numbers. Maya, who once believed she needed to accept blame to protect her paycheck. Helen, who nearly lost her bakery because no one had explained her contract. Walter, who finally interrupted his habit of silence. Mason, who loved me across 2 lifetimes, even though he remembered only one. Lily and Ben, who would grow up knowing that family did not require surrender. I folded my written speech. My sister used to say she was born lucky. I began. The crowd became quiet. For a long time I believed her. I thought some people were simply chosen to receive more praise, more chances, more forgiveness. Mother lowered her eyes. I believed the rest. Of us were supposed to work quietly and feel grateful for whatever remained. Mason stood beside the stage, but luck did not rebuild this orchard. People did. People who told the truth when silence was easier. People who shared credit. People who read the fine print. People who stood between children and danger. People who stayed. Maya wiped tears from her eyes. Tonight, I don't want to celebrate one family name. I want to celebrate every person who chose to build something honest after someone else tried to burn it down. Applause rose throughout the orchard. Fireworks opened above the trees. Ben shouted with excitement. Lily covered her ears and laughed. Mason joined me on the stage. I stole my ending, he whispered. What ending? I was going to say something wise about second chances. You can still say it. He took the microphone. I fixed the cider press. Everyone laughed. I pushed his shoulder. That's your wisdom? It was extremely broken. Then he lowered the microphone and spoke only to me. My second chance was you believing me. My eyes filled with tears. My second chance was learning how. He kissed me beneath the fireworks. In my first life, I believed fortune meant being protected from loss. I had been wrong. Real. Fortune was recognizing what deserved protection before it disappeared. It was a husband who stood beside me when my relatives stood against me. It was children who were still alive to stain their shirts with cider. It was friends who became family because they offered loyalty instead of demanding obedience, and it was the courage to close a door even when the person outside called that boundary cruelty. Celeste spent her entire life trying to prove she was special. I spent mine believing I needed permission to matter. Neither of us understood the truth. A good life is not awarded to the luckiest person in the room. It is built by people who stop, handing their future to those determined to steal it. Mason squeezed my hand. Lily and Ben ran onto the stage. The four of us stood together, beneath a sky filled with light. This time, no one was missing. This time, I knew exactly who loved me. And this time, I would never mistake their love for anything less than my greatest fortune.